Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Nick. It's wonderful having you here. We're super grateful for this podcast session with you.
Yeah. Would you like to start off with a poem that you have prepared for today's session?
Oh yes, I love doing poems. They say things so much better than I do. This particular poem is a poem by the German poet Rilke, and it's about a unicorn. Now, as you know, a unicorn. Well, in theory, it doesn't really exist, but we all just actually know what a unicorn is. Got that great sort of thing coming out of his horn.
Mm-hmm.
But this is a particularly beautiful poem because it says very much about the way I work, and which has a lot to do with imagination. So if I could just give it to you, this is a creature that has never been. They did not know it. And yet, nonetheless, they loved the way it moved, its suppleness, its neck, its very look, mild and serene. Not there, but because they loved it, it behaved as though it were. They always left some space. And in that clear, unpeopled space they saved, it gently raised its head with scarce a trace of not being there. They fed it, not with corn, but simply with the possibility of being. And this conferred such strength. Its brow put out a horn. Now, you know perfectly well the unicorn doesn't exist.
No.
But the two key lines in that poem are because they loved it, it behaved as though it did. And I work very much with the interior world. I've got slightly fed up with words. They can slip and slide and change, and you can have one idea one day and the. But the inside world is a world we've rather forgotten about, and it's there. So if we love it, if we pay attention to it, something strange begins to happen. And the other, I think, particularly beautiful line there is they fed it not with corn. So they didn't give it all the stuff we're usually given. They fed it not with corn, but simply with the possibility of being. And this conferred such strength, its brow put out a horn. I think every child, that's all every child ever wanted, was just to be allowed to be seen for what they actually are. And children who are loved will follow the example of their parents. And if their parents set a good example, then they'll learn how to behave properly.
That is beautiful. Wow.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. It's beautifully relevant for today's topic and working through, you know, the problems that people have with inner child healing and connecting with that. So thank you so much. I'm just going to introduce the episode. So welcome everybody. If you're new, if you're not, welcome back. We are your hosts, Simone and
Mia. And today we are joined by the wonderful Nick Pearson, psychotherapist, who is just also an amazing human being. Thank you so much for joining us, Nick. And before we get into the episode, I just wanted to give a quick disclaimer or a trigger warning, because in this episode we will be discussing sensitive topics such as cancer, autoimmune diseases. So we encourage all of our listeners to just, you know, listen with discretion and also inform yourselves before you make any kind of decisions about your health or informing your loved ones about different things. So yeah, we hope you just enjoy this episode, and it's just, food for thought.
Perfect. Okay, so to start with, I'd like to go back to your kind of canon event, if you will. What is your story? What made you want to change your life?
nobody really gets into this particular profession unless they're thoroughly muddled. I mean, I don't. You see, I think we're all in a bit of a muddle. But I certainly, around the middle of my life, I'd had a very adventurous life. I'd been in the army, and I'd been in a fairly successful business, and I'd heavens, even the thought of it now. But I'd stood for Parliament, and I'd been on my local council, and all this sort of stuff. But in the middle of life, I found myself not particularly happy and not particularly well. And certainly not fulfilled, and not particularly proud about anything I was really doing. I think it looked okay on paper, but you know. And then I had a big event which came along and just knocked me off my course, and I had to start again. And I had a very bad accident in which I killed a man driving into work one morning, and that just changed everything.
Wow. Okay. And how did you feel differently afterwards? Can you explain?
Well, at the time of the accident, actually in the middle of the accident, I just knew I couldn't go on pretending that I was doing what I wanted to do, or that I was, to be really honest, particularly interested in what I was doing. I was going through the motions. I was actually reasonably good at it, or good enough to get away with it, I think. But my heart wasn't really completely engaged. And luckily I was sort of curious enough to sort of feel I could do something about that, or I had to, no, not curious, because I had to do something about it, because with that accident, everything I thought I was working towards, what I was going to be, was just completely wiped out.
Wow, that's amazing. So how did you find that kind of psychotherapy, or just like helping people speak through their experiences and visualization and stuff like that? Obviously we'll get into what you actually do and how it works later on, but how did you find that was your calling?
Well, what actually happened was I was completely exhausted by this whole thing. I'd been selected by the wonderful people of the great city of Oldham to represent them as a Conservative candidate, and so I'd had 3 years of trying to make that work and trying to run my own business, and I was basically, and then I had the accident. I was completely exhausted, and I went on holiday to Italy with the woman who was very courageously about to become my wife. I'm not sure how wise that was, but anyway, she mercifully decided to marry me. And it was in Italy, while I was recovering, that I had an absolutely epic dream. And the dream was about Carl Jung, the great Swiss psychologist. And it's sort of worth saying that I didn't really know anything about Carl Jung. In the world I came out of, no one was interested in psychiatry or therapy. And I'd been an officer in the army. Officers don't become therapists, sort of stuff. You know, there was a lot of that around. But I had this tremendous dream, and it was like you can get big dreams and you can get nonsensical dreams. The big dreams, like, you need to pay attention to. And this was like a huge dream. And I can tell you, I was just, in the dream, I was sitting on a beach, cross-legged on a beach, and I had in my left hand a plant, and it was clearly dying. And it was attached to the soil by one little tiny root, and it was about to break. And this voice from everywhere just said the word Jung, and it was like a command. I planted the plant back in the soil, it started to grow. Well, you don't have to be an archbishop to work that one out, I think. But the funny thing was, I didn't know anything about Jung. And then in one of those extraordinary way life works, I got home, and a wonderful old aunt of mine said, "Oh, I've been looking for you. I've got a book I think you ought to read." And that was...
Wow.
And she gave me Lawrence van der Post's magnificent book called The Story of Our Time. And van der Post realized that we were in a very strange period of history, I think, and he wrote this beautiful book on Jung. She gave it to me, so I read it, and I thought, wow, that is where we are off to. And I bought 15 volumes of Jung. I read the whole lot, and I said, okay, that's it. That's where we're going.
Wow.
Beautiful.
And that dream gave me my vocation. Actually, I didn't qualify, I didn't train for a number of years later, partly because I was terrified of the judgment of my peers. I mean, like, army officers don't become therapists, sort of stuff, you know. But eventually it became absolutely obvious that that's where my interest lay, it's what I really wanted to do, and so I trained, and it was the best thing I ever did.
That's amazing.
That's so great.
How long have you been doing what you're doing now?
I didn't qualify till I was 60. I can't do the maths, but I think I was about 60 something, just. So, yeah, I've been practicing for 20 something years.
That's amazing.
So I'm 80 something now. And I just feel I'm just beginning. It's very exciting.
Oh, I love it.
It's so beautiful, and it just shows that you can change. You
Totally.
can't keep on living a lie and feeling, trapped in a world of, lies and things that you don't
Yes.
really want to do. You're not living in your truth, or you might not even know that you're not living in your truth until something shocks you and wakes you up. But it's so beautiful that you made the change, and you are who you are now, and you're helping so many people. It's just incredible. You've helped me and so many people I know, and it's incredible.
I think that word trapped is so important, Simone, because I do think people feel trapped. And I think it's a very particular thing. I think we're trapped by a way that we're educated to be. And I come back to my opening poem. We don't really believe in the imagination in the Western world. We believe in hard scientific facts. And hard scientific facts, generally speaking, you have to be able to weigh and measure and see them for them to exist. But I'm never quite sure how beauty or kindness or gentleness fit into that category, because they're quite tricky to weigh and measure. But I don't think you'd say they don't exist.
So true.
So people, I think, are trapped into trying to sort their lives out by just thinking about it. So this wonderful thing we have on the top of our shoulders, this marvellous, clever thing, if you reflect on it for a minute, it's very good going around in circles and circles and circles and solving absolutely nothing when it comes to yourself. And you think about stuff, your body goes wrong, so you think about it. You get onto Google and you Google, and you suddenly find that the tummy ache could be one of 100 diseases which will probably kill you by next Tuesday. And, all that does is increase your anxiety. My way of working has been, I discovered for myself, because I had an autoimmune disease of my own which I had to deal with, that if you could stop this thing, if you could stop that mind thinking all the time by switching to a different faculty we have, which is just simple, pure awareness. Now, awareness is a magical quality we have. It's not thinking. If you think you're aware, and you find you're thinking at the same time, then you're not completely aware. And you can just be aware of your body, be aware of your heart. And just test that out and just see if you understand what being aware means. Because it is not thinking about it. It's just learning to be aware. And I have in my mind, I was always very keen on the civilization of the American Plains Indians. There was a tremendous wisdom, as it was, I think, there was in Africa and certainly the Far East before our present industrial time. And the way those peoples lived in their environment, they just were, I think, they just were aware of it. And they had, therefore, this incredible relationship with their environment, which they knew was magical, knew was beautiful, and they looked after it. And then the white man turned up, and there are descriptions of this in the Indian histories. And the Indians couldn't understand what the look in his eye was. It was sort of restless and greedy and looking for something. And that, I think, is what our mind does. It sets up a different relationship with the world. Was going back a little, but you can't do it all the time, just being a little bit more aware of your own body rather than thinking about it can bring tremendous benefits.
That's amazing.
I think awareness is something that no one really thinks about, really.
But you see what you just said?
So
you said what no one thinks about.
Yeah.
It's like,
well, it's something that's so present within you all the time, yet you're so in your head that you can't quite connect with your body.
So true.
Yeah.
And is that kind of now talking about like your work and like how you work with your patients and your ethics and all of that stuff, is that's what you bring, right? Is just that awareness, and that's how you teach kind of your clients or
I was
patients.
trained as a perfectly standard talking therapist. I got nothing against talking. I did lots of it myself. I mean, I had to do 200 hours just to qualify. So you get put through it. And some of that's really useful in one's development of self-knowledge, which is really what this in the end is all about. But I came to observe that it's not enough. It's all very nice, and particularly when somebody's listening to, and most people love talking about themselves, particularly me. So it's like,
well, this is great.
it's like we can all do that. But I think, there I go again, I think, it's like we have these other faculties, of which, to me, awareness is the really big one. But also there's intuition and other faculties like that. We've come to rely entirely, in the last 300 or 400 years, on this discursive mind of ours, this thinking mind. And you know, if you look at Western philosophy in the last 300 or 400 years, it is all about thinking. In the tradition I tremendously admire, which came out of Iran, to be a philosopher meant you had to know how to enter the state of ecstasy. Now, we need a pill to do that? It's rather pathetic. They had to learn that the ecstasy was in us and how to do that, and that made you a philosopher. I think that's a much better idea. So, yes, I have very much developed away from the talking model, because the talking model went back to the history, and come on, tell me more, where did you grow up, and tell you about, did your mummy put you in green boots or red ones, or what was it all like? And you can spend weeks doing that. And I just sort of came to the feeling it didn't really change anything very much. So I did with insights from various other traditions, spiritual traditions, I have to say, which is, I know, a word that people are sort of slightly nervous about these days. I'm nervous of the word religious, not spiritual. I think we all have these faculties in us which need to be satisfied. So I began to work in a completely different way, really with the imagination and with awareness. And so I don't want to hear about the history. I don't want to hear about the talking history. I want to look at what you look like on the inside. Or I at least want to show you that, because I think that'll help you more than sitting and talking to me for the next 100 years.
And for our listeners, could you kind of explain a little bit about what that means?
Yeah. It's I recognize, because of the way we're all conditioned to think, it's a big jump for people to say, well, what does that actually mean? Because if you're not careful, you just start thinking about it rather than actually doing it. But we, all of us, have images that rise up inside us. And we access those through the imagination, through imagination, images. And these images have a much greater effect on our minds and our bodies than we would ever dream. So, for example, if I think we're going to perhaps touch on this business of the child later on, but if I if I just suggested to you, if I asked you to imagine a child, what's going to happen is an image of a child is going to appear in your head. Probably has done already. You've probably got it. Both of you, you're looking at a child. Now, that's an image. Obviously, the child's not here. But what has happened is I've triggered in you I've invited the psyche to produce an image of a child. And that image will tell me more about you than any amount of talking. Because the state of that child as it appears up in your image will be full of information. We get also intimations of the images that haunt our inner world through dreams. So dreams may look at first glance as if they're rubbish, and I think the scientific world would say absolute nonsense, really. But if you go back to my poem, not there, because they loved it, it behaved as though it was. And as you turn your attention inside to these images, they begin to furnish you with very important information about your world and your life.
Okay.
That's beautiful.
Beautiful. Yeah, I feel like I can definitely relate to what you're saying. But I know for a fact there's so many people that have never, ever even ought or thought about what their dreams might mean and what their inner child even is and feels like. So if you're listening, this might be a sign for you to prompt that thought and think about, how do you feel about your inner child? What do your dreams mean to you? I mean, I know you say not to take them too literally, but they do tell you a lot with your dreams.
I think one of the problems is that we have 60,000 therapists in this country now, and I just think what a wonderful, wonderful thing it would be if they were all working in that way, because I've seen the effects on the people I work with, and I think it's therapy is quite a new science, really, in a way. It really, in the Western world, really only started the sort of 19th century. They've got much earlier roots. Really, it's a relatively new development, and so it's in development. And I hope we can come to see that talking is not good enough, because what we do when we talk about something. So you come to me with acute anxiety, and we can sit and talk about it very interestingly for weeks, really. I mean, we can try and look at the roots of it. I can suggest ways of dealing with it. But what we're doing is we're talking about it. Whereas my first question to you, if you have acute anxiety, is to say, where is it? Where is it? Where do you carry your anxiety in the body? Because, one of the extraordinary things, I think it took me a long time to learn, if we ever thought about it, we could imagine that our feelings are in the head, or our emotions are in the head. But all feeling is in the body. And I don't know if we're going to come on talk a little bit about autoimmune disease, but I've become tremendously interested in the emotions and the feelings behind what eventually become dis-eases. And so it's a difficult concept for people to climb into on their own, I'm afraid, because you're entering a different world from the world you've been conditioned in. So I think it's a process. I think those who are interested will definitely find a way, but it's a bit of a jump. Yeah.
I think that's beautiful.
Yeah.
You also mentioned, obviously, you have clients, and we found some testimonials on your website, which we'd love to have the chance to read out now. I have one, and then Simone has one afterwards. Just to kind of, emphasize the kind of effect that you have on people and the work that you do with people. Like the outcome is amazing. So I have one here from a woman with breast cancer. And she says, when I was first diagnosed with cancer, I felt completely overwhelmed, fearful and lost. The C word had shaken my world and placed a deep pit of anxiety in my belly. Again, really just, talking about the physicalness of it. It's amazing. Talking with Nick changed much of that at our first meeting. Through a visualization of the tumour in my breast, I was able to meet my cancer directly and begin to relate to its energy and unwelcome reality and wonder why it was there, what it represented and what response it needed from me. It was not difficult to begin to understand how my life and lifestyle had to change and how I had given myself such a hard time and been so blind for years. This empowered me to make the necessary changes. By putting me directly visually in touch with the cancer, Nick helped me to face my fear, not only of the actual cancer, but of the fear of death, which was buried in there along with the cancer. Once I had made progress with the exercises for doing this, I felt so much calmer. The tumour was removed by surgery. I had some relatively minimal treatment, and I know it's not coming back. I can honestly say the whole experience has been life-changing for the better. That is, just reading that is so powerful because...
So touching.
Yes, it's amazing because I don't pretend to know anything about cancer. And I think I really, what I actually do is quite simple.
Yeah.
I just introduce people to a different dimension of themselves. And what is so thrilling about this is this lovely lady, she sort of knew on day one this was a better way to look at her disease. She just knew it. I didn't have to convince her. I'm not selling anything. But by helping her to look at herself in a different way, it empowered her, or she empowered herself. And I think that was the really striking thing about that case, was literally after the first meeting, we'd somehow, just deflated the terror. Because she could actually see, through a visualization, she could actually see her tumour. And the tumour informed her of its state, if I could say this. It's one thing about images, and this I learned from the spiritual tradition of the Sufis. I'm not a Sufi, but I learned a lot from them. The image bears witness to your state. So when we get to look at an image of a cancer tumour, it has something to tell you about the state you're in. I mean, it sounds sort of peculiar, but that's the way it seems to work. We can actually tell by visualizing a tumour very often what the emotion is behind it. In her case, it was rage.
Repressed rage.
Suppressed rage.
Yeah. It's amazing, like, just seeing the link of that and how I think, specifically with women who have breast cancer as well, it is like a very internal battle that they face, specifically with their emotions.
Totally. Because we're brought up to be nice. It's part of our culture. It's part of our Western culture. You've got to be a good girl. We can't. If I was to say the most common thing that I'm greeted by clients who come to work with me is very often they don't feel good enough. Now I find that terribly, terribly shocking because they're usually absolutely lovely people. But somewhere along the line, the culture said there are elements of you that are not good enough. We want you to be bright and shiny and good and whatever. And we don't. So they, in order to be acceptable, to be able to be lovable, they do down part of their nature. And a lot of my work is getting them to recover that side of their nature and love it. Like the unicorn, love the crippled side. And I think you've seen a little film I made, which you can see on YouTube, about an amazing case of where we did that. And it's not rocket science. As I say, I have no qualifications at all, except my experience, which is, I think, the only qualifications that's really worth having, I think, in a funny way.
It is.
I agree. I completely agree.
Okay, so I've got one testimonial from a 73-year-old man with Parkinson's. So he said, I'm 73 and was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease in 2020. My wife suggested some form of therapy might help, but I dismissed that earlier on. I had standard treatment and medication for 2 years, which helped me, but some aspects of my condition continued to deteriorate, particularly swallowing, talking fatigue, and problems with my right arm, which interfered with my music making, which I love. I suffered from a pretty constant acute anxiety, and my whole attitude to life started to diminish as concerned about my situation. I began to close in on myself. I had 3 sessions and a couple of Zooms with Nick, and he showed me a whole new approach to this disease. Generally, this included learning how to become more aware of the stress and stressed energy in the body, and importantly, how to attend to it and release it. Internal visualizations of the images of my inside world and the location of my symptoms were really helpful in learning to see what was really going on inside of me. Most importantly, learning the conscious deep breathing exercises I did every day to get at the underlying stress that had built up over a lifetime and release it. Nick believed the underlying stress brought about by an excessive desire to control everything lay behind the whole condition. I'm beginning to see how this may be true. I'm happy to say it's working. By learning to release the tight stress muscles around my throat and neck, my swallowing and talking has improved. I have been able to start properly walking again, and best of all, my music making has become possible again. Of course, it's a long journey, but it's a wonderful start in such a short space of time, and at 73, I can face life again with renewed energy, less anxiety, and hope.
Yeah, it's brilliant. It's a lovely
Love
story.
that.
Such a lovely story.
Yeah.
And again, I have to say, it was not rocket science. You see, I make a huge differentiation between a disease where there is a pathogen involved, where, as far as we know, there's a virus involved. I know nothing about viruses. Although I just know nothing about viruses. So I wouldn't really know how to approach that. But there are a lot of these autoimmune diseases where there's no virus. Parkinson's, as far as we know, it doesn't seem to be a virus. So my curiosity was, what's happening that the muscles around the jaw and the throat and the neck are getting so tight that it's stopping this guy swallowing his medication and speaking. Now, again, all my work is only because people come to see me and they have conditions. And I have to say, I've never tried to put myself in a position because I knew what I was talking about. To me, it's a joint endeavour. We put our heads together and say, well, now, what's going on? Can we not work this out between us? And the reason I learned about stress was I had a number of cases of endometriosis and fibroids in the uterus and the womb and the fallopian tubes, and I know very little about it, but what I discovered with these clients, working with them, was there was an enormous tension in that part of the body that they were holding for whatever reasons. Usually something to do with abuse, either external abuse or the way they learned to abuse themselves. And we had some really exciting successes by just teaching these lovely girls to release that stress in that whole area by breathing exercises. So I sort of repeat myself endlessly. It's not that I've really it's not rocket science. It's just you need to pay attention to these stressed areas in the body. Take your symptoms seriously and begin to work with them yourself to release the stress it can bring about. Then get out of the way and let the body's a miracle. It'll sort itself out.
Yeah, I believe given the right environment, with acceptance and awareness, your body has the wisdom to take over and heal itself.
Exactly.
Obviously, I understand that there's so many situations where you do need, external intervention to help out with whether that be medication or surgery or whatnot. I'm not saying you can do it just with your mind, but your mind has your mind has a lot of power over your body. And I think you see it a lot in placebo drug trials where people are given a certain drug and then they're believing they're believing that they,
and their
that
body
they're fine,
responds.
and their body responds.
Yeah.
And with that belief, you know, you can just see it. It's so clear as day, that, you know, the belief that you're okay is completely how your body can heal. By processing your rage, your sadness, your raw emotions, as and when they come up, is really just actually important for your bodily health, not just for your mental health, because you have to take care of your mental health in order to take care of your body.
So true. And I feel like people always try and separate the two, like that's mental, that's body, but it's so like
it's completely
intertwined. They both
and
speak
that
to
is
each
a
other.
Western thing. I mean, other cultures have not done that. They know that the mind and the body are one thing. We have become absolutely superb at one aspect of which is the material side. And I just want to say, none of this is in competition with good medical practice. In fact, I see it as an adjunct to it. Because when you think about it, even if, let's just say that here we have a bit of an insight about a particular case of Parkinson's, which has had a really happy result, which it has. But it required some therapeutic help and knowledge. And you think of the sheer numbers that the National Health has to deal with. You can't suddenly change the medical model overnight. It'll be a very slow process. What one hopes is that people will begin to understand themselves. There's a little bit they can do for themselves without, and I think the NHS really like that. You know, if we can take some of the pressure off them. I'd not say you can cure every case of Parkinson's in this way, but it's just quite interesting that in these little individual cases we seem to be very successful. Yeah.
So true. Also, I just kind of want to bring it back. You mentioned obviously working with your inner child earlier. I kind of want to bring it back to that a little bit more. How is it, do you work with the inner child with every one of your patients, or do you, not patients, clients, or
clients?
I call them fellow travellers. Really.
With your fellow travellers, do you work with the inner child every time, or is it just kind of like you see what they need and then you work with them with?
Look, for me, the archetype of the child is one of the sort of key structures of the personality. And if you reflect on it for a second, the entire Christian story and the whole Christian culture, which seems to be in a bit of trouble at the moment, but the entire thing starts with the birth of a child. The whole business is at the winter, at the base of the winter equinox, the darkest point of the year, the child is born. So the child, for me, simply represents new life, new energy, new life. And the Celts had their golden child before the Christians arrived, so obviously it was like, there's been an idea around there before. And I think it's an absolutely critical part of the personality. Not to talk about, I'm sorry, but so much inner child work today is done through memory and through talking about childhood. For me, that is not the point. The point for me is to show people how to visualize that inner archetype of the child, and that is a transforming experience, really. So yes, it's very important, very, very important to me. It was very important in my own journey, and I find it, generally speaking, very important for most people's.
I notice it with myself, because I have had one session with you, Nick, for anyone listening, and so I've noticed it with myself that when I feel sad or just generally not quite myself, if I noticed my inner child next to me, like you said, immediately I feel better.
That's so lovely.
Yeah.
That's so lovely. And of course it encourages me enormously when people tell me that, because I think, well, maybe I'm not quite as batty as I thought I was.
No.
You know? It's like, it's real. It's real. And I'm finding this more and more and more with these inner images. I mean, there is a devastating truth to them. We're sort of very fixed on what's going on out there. But for me, the really key is what's going on in here, because that will dictate what's going on out there.
Yeah, it really will.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Is there anything else we wanted to discuss, or should we?
We do have a question, because obviously I would say the majority of our listeners are women, kind of younger women, but just women in general. And we wanted to ask you, what do you, in your opinion, think is the most important thing women can do for their own health?
I think I really wonder whether I'm qualified to answer that question, but I'll try.
From your experience, and
I mean, to me, what has been really helpful with the women who are nice enough to come and work with me has been showing them how to pay attention to their own bodies, not with this busy thinking mind, but with their awareness. Because it's much, much less judgmental. As soon as the mind gets in touch with the symptom, you say, I've got a pain in my tummy. Oh, well, it could be this, it could be that. And then you Google, as I said earlier, you Google it and you've got 100 reasons. You've got cancer of the stomach, you're going to be dead by Tuesday. Whereas actually, if you learn how to be aware of the tensions in your body, and then learn very, very simple breathing exercises to release them. I spent years going to India and to ashrams in India, and they taught me this wonderful science of pranayam, which is this wonderful breath. But I'm English and I'm not Indian, and so I just use breath very simply. So if you have a tension around the stomach, breathe into it and then release it, and breathe into it and release it. Do that 20 times and see how you feel. So I would say pay attention, have trust in your own common sense to look after the tensions in your body before you get, you know, and then you may need help from a doctor or you may not. It will be up to you. So I think that's really, really, really important, is just and learning the value of breathing properly is so important. You just have to think, take a big deep breath and just release it. And immediately the body feels better.
It's so true. It's so true. You just feel like you've released just all the heavy, dense energy in your body, and then you just kind of feel new.
And honestly, don't read too many books. Practice. And I look at the books. I got far too many books. For years I read books thinking I was doing something. But what actually changes things is practice. You've got to practice.
Do it, yeah. That's beautiful.
Thank you so much for your wisdom.
Is
really
there
enlightening.
Yeah, is there any advice you would give as we're wrapping up this episode? Is there any advice you would give to anyone listening right now? One piece of advice that you could give?
Oh, I don't know about advice, because as I say, I rather shy away from advice. But I think that there's one thing I've been thinking a lot about recently, which I think is just so lovely. It's also cheaper than antidepressants, and I think much more effective. It sort of centers around an old-fashioned word, which you may think immediately I'm trying to make some sort of religious point, which I'm absolutely, completely not. It's a word called praise. And I know my reaction to the word praise is immediately I start thinking, oh, they're getting sort of churchy again, and we've had our lot of that. But I was inspired by Cat Stevens' beautiful poem, Morning Has Broken. And in that first verse, he says, morning has broken like the first morning. Blackbird has spoken like the first bird. I love that idea. It's like that simple idea of a bird singing like the first bird that ever sang. And then he says these two extraordinary lines. He says, praise for that singing. Praise for the morning. Praise for them springing fresh from the world. Now, my suggestion is when you're in the dumps, find some tiny thing to be grateful for and praise. And it can be that absolutely life-saving cup of coffee. It can be your cool new trainers. But address them and say, oh, thank you for being so beautiful. Thank you for being so hot and lovely, my cup of coffee. Thank you for... And then maybe there's a tree outside your flat which is putting on leaves, and just notice it and thank it. And what will happen? You'll feel better. That's my suggestion.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. I think the power of noticing when you're in such a deep rumination, and you know, when you're feeling absolutely miserable about, it can be like the smallest things that have just triggered you into feeling absolutely miserable, and you're like, no, everything is horrible, I hate my life, nothing's working in my favor, nothing's going well, I feel super overwhelmed. And then, like, you know, you kind of feel like, I don't feel like being grateful right now, I don't even want to be grateful.
No.
But just, we're not saying dismiss your problems completely, it's just having that moment with whatever it is that's good will just switch perspective immediately and help you to just, yeah, gain
Change
your
gear.
life back. Gain
Change
your life
gear.
back.
Yeah.
But I call it just changing gear. And you're so right.
Mm.
We can be absolutely buried in misery. And I'm not saying that you're not having a terrible time and life isn't generally tough. I'm not pretending that for a minute. What I'm saying is that there is this little trick which seems as if we can just change gear. And in spite of the fact that you're having a tough time and the boss is a nightmare and, you know, the boyfriend's just left and all the sort of things that happen, you manage to just raise your spirit and learn something incredibly valuable about us human beings, is that we do have spirits, you know, which can be raised even if we're, you know, in a bit of a muddle.
Yeah.
Wow.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful advice.
Talking about praise, we'd like to praise you.
Yeah.
Thank
Yeah.
you, Nick, for coming onto the
Yeah,
podcast.
you're very, very kind. Well, I'm thrilled to be on seedlings because I think these are seedlings.
Yeah.
I'm not making any great claims about them, except to say, look, it's just quite interesting when you plant this particular seed, something comes up you didn't really quite sort of expect, you know.
Yeah.
So I think with that spirit of adventure, I'd say it's been a great, great pleasure to come and chat.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is really precious, amazing words. And yeah, we hope that we've planted a seed. This is all, you know, food for thought. And thank you, everybody, for listening. Thank you for tuning in. Happy New Year. And we'll see you in the next episode.
Thank you.
Thank you.